Director at MDE. I'll be facilitating today's meeting on behalf of our chair, Secretary of the Environment, Serena McElwain. I'll start with some logistics. And then anyone else is logged in the room, please mute all your speakers and microphones. And then I'll hand off to our chair and our co-chairs for welcome remarks. This is the meeting of the year where we start to debate the recommendations that will form the bulk of the Commission's annual report. Like similar recommendations meetings, we flip the agenda around a little bit and we do public comment at the beginning, so commenters can speak to the draft recommendations before you all consider and vote on them. I'll do a quick, thank you. A quick roll call here so we can check for quorum. For the commissioners who are online, I'm just going to read the names of everyone I see in the webinar, and then we'll go around the room. So for those who are online, I see our co-chair Ann Lindner. I see Delegate Stein, People's Counsel David Lapp. I see Treasurer Davis. Eric Fisher, our Critical Error Commission Chair. Hans Schmidt in for Secretary Addix. I see Secretary Kurtz. Administrator Belton. Senator Feldman. Have I missed any commissioners who are logged in online?
No, Chris. Charmaine Brown is on the line.
Oh, excellent. We see you, Charmaine. Okay, then, shall we go around the room? Perhaps
Excuse me, Beth Harbor's on the line.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Sorry, I missed you. Okay, and in the room?
Serena McElwain, Secretary, Chair.
Good afternoon, Kim Coe, Co-Chair.
Hi, folks. David Smetic, an NGO rep on the commission.
Jennifer Laszlo Mizrahi, representing Philanthropy. Rebecca Flores, Secretary of Maryland Department of Planning.
Paul Pinsky, MEA.
Michael Powell, co-chair of the Mitigation Working Group.
Robin Gilden, University of Maryland School of Nursing.
Bill Dennison, University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, chair of the Science and Technical Work Group.
Okay. Any other members of the commission we've missed?
Derek Davis, State Treasurer.
Excellent. So we do have a quorum.
Okay.
The final logistical note before I hand off to the chair for welcome remarks. Any members of the public who would like to make a comment who are in the webinar, please put your name in the chat and we'll add you to the list. And I believe we have at least a couple in the room. Okay. We'll go through public comment after the welcoming remarks.
Welcome. So happy to see all of you, particularly the ones who are here in person. I get to see you up close and personal, and good to see all of you online as well on the videos. We have some important business today, particularly discussion of the recommendations. So I'm not going to waste too much time with the welcome because we need to get right to it. So with that, that's it for me. Let's get started. Do you have any?
No.
It's okay. All right.
Okay, so we'll start with the two public comments in the room and then we'll turn online and sort of starting.
Just from here is okay?
Yeah, if you could come a little bit closer to the center of the room so we're sure the microphones pick you up. And we have several commenters, so I'd appreciate if you could do just a couple of minutes.
Sure. I'll be brief. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sinai Emanuel. I'm a climate policy analyst with Progressive Maryland. And I'm speaking on behalf of hundreds of residents in South Baltimore, in Cherry Hill and Westport, living adjacent to the incinerator, who have signed on to our petition to eliminate trash incineration from the state's renewable portfolio standard. Firstly, I want to thank the Commission for providing an opportunity for public comment. We are very happy that Maryland's Climate Change Commission has included Recommendation 25, which would eliminate trash incineration from our state's renewable portfolio standard. Burning trash for energy is not clean and is not renewable. This inclusion will be a meaningful step toward addressing environmental injustice in our community by preventing excessively polluting sources of energy from receiving ratepayer funds. The Brusco incinerator, which is literally down the street, is the single largest stationary source of emissions and pollution in the city, contributing CO2 emissions comparable to that of 140,000 cars. Not only does this facility emit CO2, it also radiates mercury, lead, and exacerbates asthma symptoms in a city already disproportionately impacted by high asthma rates and respiratory issues. It is unacceptable that Marylanders near and far subsidize the burning of trash and the pollution of Black, brown, and low-income neighborhoods and overburdened communities. But the solution to this issue actually lies within those communities who have embraced and developed local capacity to build composting, to compost and recycle and fight against injustice. Baltimore recently received funds to build a composting facility, which is going to complement the grassroots efforts of groups engaged in composting. Work is being done to divert trash from the incinerator because 80% of what's burned can actually be recycled or composted. The fiscal note from last year's legislation on eliminating trash incineration concluded that there would be little impact on compliance costs, minimal impact on customer electricity, and very little impact on prices for Tier 1 or RECs. Additionally, Baltimore City, Montgomery County, and Frederick County all submitted written testimony in support of eliminating incineration from RPS, and the Baltimore City Director of Sustainability and the City Councilman representing the District of Brusco, Alicia Porter, both came down to Annapolis to testify in favor of cleaning up RPS. So to conclude, the state's renewable portfolio standard should not include unclean sources of energy, and this is a perfect first step to doing so. And like trash incineration, biogas and biomass are not renewable, pollute the climate, and should have no place in Maryland's climate spending. We hope that the commission will push the state to fully implement recommendation 23 and ensure the state spending on energy projects promotes climate-aligned, zero-emission technologies, which do not include biomass, biogas, and importantly, trash incineration. Thank you for having the opportunity to comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you for this opportunity to provide some comment. My name is Mike O'Halloran, speaking today on behalf of MAPTA, which is the Association for Energy Marketers, Fuel Distributors, and Convenience Store Owners and Operators. Our members are concerned with numerous recommendations from the Mitigation Working Group in particular. Recommendations 5 and 6 as they relate to the transportation sector, and 20, 21, 23, and 24 as they relate to the built environment. Combined, these recommendations, as well as others, put Maryland on a path towards a sole source energy policy predicated on electricity. This is not only costly to Marylanders, but also dangerous. MAPTA believes in a diverse energy portfolio. In regard to the transportation sector recommendations, it is very unlikely the state will have the charging infrastructure ready and accessible for these vehicles, especially heavy-duty vehicles, under the timeline that is a part of the regulations in effect and in planning. Other concerns include the cost of implementation, equipment, vehicle price, ongoing costs, and the ability of the state to design and build the infrastructure needed to support a transportation sector based largely on zero-emission vehicles. For the built environment, our members are concerned for the customers and clients who depend on grant opportunities, whether it be SAFE funding or other programs, particularly in an emergency, when a system replacement is called for and an all-electric system is not available, is too costly, or is even in an area that is hard to electrify. Further, we urge the Commission to consider biofuels in their report as included in the Climate Solutions Now Act passed by the General Assembly. Again, we appreciate the attention to these comments and look forward to working with the Commission. Thank you.
Mike. Okay, so those are the comments in the room. We have 3 online, going in order of who put their name in the chat first. Jeff Silva.
Hi, thank you very much. I'm going to post something in the chat, and as a record, there it is. There it is. Thank you. Basically, Maryland Army National Guardsman Sergeant Edison Herman was swept away in a rushing flood while assisting Kate Bowman to escape her flooding shop in Ellicott City. Melkin Cedilio 19, died while trying to save his mother when he returned back to her flooded apartment after not seeing that she had escaped. I bring you their names so that Maryland's Commission on Climate Change will recommend that our governor inform the governors of states that supply electricity to the PJM utility grid that these civic heroes died from global warming fueled intense rainstorms that were predicted by scientists 20 years ago through their climate models. Maryland's pathways directs us to rely on a disturbing amount of electricity imported from U.S. states producing the most pounds of carbon per megawatt hour of electricity. It's called carbon intensity per megawatt hour. Only our governor has the agency to influence the governors of those states to tell their electricity producers to lower their carbon intensity so that the imported electricity does not negate Maryland's valiant mitigation efforts or its climate heroes. I support all recommendations in batch 1 and batch 2. Thank you very much for your time and good luck.
You, Mr. Silva. Next, Dave Arndt.
Yes, this is Dave Arndt from the Climate Justice Wing and a member of Union of Concerned Scientists. I fully support the previous recommendations that we need to remove incineration, biogas, biofuels from our RPS and from our energy portfolio. These are false solutions that lead us tied into climate producing GHG emission products, and we need to move as quickly as possible to fully electrify our environment in Maryland because we are in a climate crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Arndt. And Sonia Demaray.
Thank you. I'll be brief. My name is Sonia Demaray. I'm the founder of the Climate Communications Coalition. I also respectfully ask that you vote favorably on recommendations 23 and 25 and halt any subsidies or incentives towards energy sources that emit even more greenhouse gases than fossil fuels. And I'm talking about trash, biomass, and biogas. Mr. Emanuel and Mr. Arndt eloquently addressed the many reasons why we need to remove trash and biogas. I'm going to address biomass very briefly. Biomass is not clean or green. According to the U.S. Energy Information Agency, burning wood emits CO2 on a level comparable only to coal. Producing woody biomass for energy pellets adds pollution from logging, soil carbon loss, transportation, processing, manufacture, making it even more polluting than fossil fuel. Let's not replace bad with worse. Biomass for energy is also not renewable or sustainable. Logging and pellet production inflicts enormous harms to underserved communities first and all of us in the long run. In addition, the forest ecosystems that are logged will not grow back for 50 to 100 years, eliminating our only existing and effective carbon capture and storage mechanism. And finally, any waste wood generated in forest management practices from tree farms, etc., should be mulched into the ground to generate fertile soils, which we are running out of, into building materials or maybe even bioplastics. But we should never burn it, re-emitting decades of stored pollution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So with no others signed up, that concludes public comment. So we will move to the recommendations discussion. So as a reminder to everyone, every year this commission issues a report with recommendations for action to the state, to the governor, to the General Assembly on climate change. The working groups consider recommendations over the course of the year and have processes where they vet those and approve them to send to you all. We distributed 2 batches of recommendations last week. We will focus today's discussion on batch 1. Those are all the recommendations we sent last Monday, all the recommendations that the working groups had approved as of last Monday. We forwarded along a second batch, batch 2, late Friday. We're not planning on focusing discussion on those since everyone just received them Friday night, so we don't assume anyone has had time to consider them fully. but time permitting, we can begin to discuss those. The way the commission's process for recommendations works is that we consider them, consider amendments to them, and then vote. And a majority vote will approve the recommendation to be included in the draft of the annual report. The commission will then have to vote on the annual report as a whole. It requires a supermajority of votes to approve it every year. So right now, when we're talking about the recommendations, this is just on an individual recommendation basis, whether to include it in that draft, which is then up for the commission's approval at the following meeting on November 9th. So I'll bring the recommendations up on the screen. We did not receive any proposed amendments last week. However, commissioners are welcome to suggest amendments that they may have for the group. There have been several that have been flagged for discussion by a number of commissioners. And so one thing that I'll suggest has been helpful in the past is if everyone sort of identifies any recommendations on the list for today that they'd like to discuss, we can flag those now. And if there are recommendations that nobody believes are worthy of discussion, that are non-controversial, the commission could consider simply voting on those in a batch up front to save time.
I'd like to discuss number 1.
Okay.
Which ones did you get feedback on that you got feedback in terms of the
Yes.
having discussion?
Sure. Others that have been flagged for discussion are mitigation working group number 3 on a dealer engagement program. Mitigation working group number 7 on locally operated transit systems. MWG number 9 on tax deductions or credits for decarbonization. And then adaptation and resilience members on commission membership. Those were all flagged for discussion before the meeting. Are there any other recommendations anyone would like to flag for discussion at this point? Yes, Davis Medic.
Generally, 9, 10, and 11 have got an overarching. That's what commissioners want.
Okay.
So right now we have 7 out of 11. So
On the MWG side, that's right.
I mean, I'd say we just go through them. It's my recommendation.
Okay. I'm seeing nods around the room, so we'll do that. So I suggest we then start with number 1. The way we like to do this is that we ask the co-chairs of the working group putting forward the recommendation to provide sort of introduction and context to the commission to start discussion. So Kim and Mike, RMW.
Kim, do you want to do one? Do you want me to?
Whatever you prefer.
Huh?
I can start it. So the mitigation work group spent a lot of our time this year on incentivizing EV purchasing, believing that that is a top priority for the state. And we talked with dealers, we talked to manufacturers, we talked to ourselves. And in front of you is the recommendations. The first in the gray area is what is the federal government. So that's just a standard for your information there. The pink area is what we are recommending for the Maryland Clean Vehicle Rebate. I'm not going to read it to you, $2,500 for a new one and $1,000 for a used EV. And then we also are recommending a low to moderate income bonus payment that would apply at the criteria of the in there under income limits. So, Mike.
And then the super.
Oh, and then the super user bonus here on the backside, if you're in a hard copy, the green area is those cars that are generating a lot of fuel use. We wanted to really incentivize that type of vehicle to transition. So that's where the super user bonus is applied.
I just add just a little bit of color. Kim is absolutely right. We spent a huge amount of time on this. We had outside consultants giving us reports. We looked at what all the other states had done. Clearly, I think the feeling of the mitigation working group is that incentives of some kind were necessary in order to meet the Climate Solutions Now Act deadlines. And so the wrestling was how much and how. I think points that were emphasized, I'm trying to summarize anything I think there was wide acceptance of, is that they really need to reflect the federal in terms of which vehicles and point of sale. For ease of transition, if you had different vehicles qualified for federal versus state, or one was at point of sale and one was later on taxes, it became much more difficult and much less beneficial. There were also lots of discussion about larger dollar numbers than what you see here. And I think there was a compromise of saying, well, we got to put that number in, and then the General Assembly can decide the right number, because there was some question about whether the numbers we were getting recommended by consultants were something the General Assembly could live with. And so the concept of having first a rebate that got more EVs on the road, which is the pink one, but then for environmental equity reasons, we added an additional one for low to moderate. And then on the super user, that came out of a couple of other states which have done something similar, where they point out that some vehicles do a lot more damage, if you want to call it that, or emit a lot more carbon than others. So taking a plug-in Prius off the road doesn't get you much. Taking an older Navigator SUV off the road does. And so there was an effort to add an additional incentive, because it basically from a more bang for the buck approach. So those were the three recommendations of the mitigation working group on this area.
And the super user we're suggesting is funded at a pilot program level, so it would be for 1 year to just see if it works.
Thank you. Yeah, discussion.
Okay, so we're gonna open it up for discussion. I'll start. Then we can, I guess you're gonna look around and see. Okay, so two questions. One, before you mentioned the old Navigator kind of example, so taking an old car off, right? Like that, like a gas guzzler. So when you mentioned that, it kind of threw off what I was going to say. So that just sounds like if it's an old Navigator, you mean like 2001 or 2003, a gas guzzler, something like that? If so, that's not really a super user. There's probably a lot of miles on that car anyway, because it's been in circulation for so long.
Yeah,
So-
really, I'm sorry.
No, no.
Could have been, I used the Navigator as an example, but the definition I would think is that you had to use over 800 gallons of fuel in the prior year. So new car, old car, it's one producing a lot of carbon. And it's a lot easier for a big, massive car to produce burn 800 gallons of fuel than a Prius. So I just use that as an example.
I see. So just my thought in general, I think that it would be hard to figure out which of these cars would actually fall into this. This is just my own, just reading it, I thought it would be very hard to really understand what a user is putting into these cars, like in terms of driving it. Because there's different reasons why, there are miles on a car. It's just a story that's untold. So that's just my one flag. The second, it's not a flag, but the second point I'd like to make is, to me, a super user would be rental car companies. They always have more miles on a car per year than I've ever seen. So that could be a target, really. It's the rental car companies, to me. So that's just what I was thinking when I read this. It might be an area to look at, because it's a use, it's a rental, right? And that's why they try to sell those cars after 2 years, is because there's so many miles on them, way more than the average, and they try to get rid of them. So maybe the idea could be looking at the rental cars in terms of electrifying rental cars. I don't know if we could do that, but it's probably have no,
I,
no jurisdiction over that, but anyway.
no, I don't think there was any discussion pro or con on rental cars. It's a good idea. On the verification for the pilot program, I think the discussion was to use a Carfax report in order to see how many miles the car was driven and know the mileage. But,
Carfax gets that information from DMV and MVA. So is that what you mean? Just getting how many miles are actually on a car? So that's what we're looking at, miles on a car. I don't know. I just think it would be hard because you can get a lot of miles on a car in 1 year, but you can get a lot of miles on a car in 5 years.
there clearly was, if I'm remembering the votes right, less support for the super user concept than for the other two. This one was, some of the recommendations here were nearly unanimous. Some of them were close votes. I think the super user had less support than the other two.
Yeah.
Right, the votes are at the bottom of the
Are they?
table there, so thank you to staff.
Good, you don't have to depend on my memory.
Oh,
So 19 out of the 20 present liked the pink clean vehicle rebate, voted for it, I should say. And then you can see the super user was 11, 3 opposed, so it was less. And honestly, I think I struggled a little bit with how do you implement this, which is why we suggested a pilot, so.
yeah, so my last comment would be on this is, I understand that with the money that we have now in MEA set aside, we run out of that money in 30 days. So if we put more on here without, I mean, we don't really have a funding source right now. So if we're running out of money within, I think I heard 30 days, in terms of giving the rebates out already. So if we add more money, wouldn't we run out even faster? Not.
Depending on how much the General Assembly allocates this year.
Just assuming that we get,
Yeah, these will be big numbers.
Well-
And you certainly can have an argument that maybe this is a number too big, and cuts have got to be made. But, you know, I'm just reporting what the mitigation working group.
okay,
And to draw attention to the footnote, we recognize that if the General Assembly can't fully fund it, that they should look at reducing the rebate amount. So rather than 25 and drop it down. So I think we all acknowledged the need for revenue. We felt that putting forward emission reduction recommendations was key to our job.
Yeah.
With letting the generals figure out the money.
okay. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, and then Jennifer and then.
Yes, I just wanted to report that I had a lengthy meeting with Mark Corman, who, is a leader on Environmental and Transportation Committee, and that he had his staff look at all the other states that already had implemented such policies, and that his staff identified no success with this policy in other states. And so it's a lot of money for no return. And so I had sent those numbers to the staff to share with others. I don't know if they were shared, but it showed no improvement in moving electric vehicles, which is what we're trying to do to get more people to electrify, number one. Number two, the polling shows that people are not aware of the current subsidies and incentives that already exist. And so we can get a lot more rate of return by what the Communications Committee has suggested by helping the public know about existing subsidies. And there's been a lot written about buyer's remorse from people who don't have home charging and office charging because we don't have the infrastructure in place yet. And I think we're at great risk at really harming our own long-term objectives if we put too many people in cars when we don't have the infrastructure to share them. If you look at today's New York Times page 2, where you see an environmental reporter who had rented a car and wound up in a very bad situation with an electric car rental, I think you can see that the bad PR that could discourage others from turning to EV puts us at great risk. So for those reasons, plus the significant cost of this program, I think that we should look at it for a future year when there's more infrastructure in place and more data from other states.
If I can add on to that, just from experience, in California, when we did this and we included more money, a lot more money, there was a really huge hike in the purchase of EVs in California because I was monitoring it. So that's one state. I don't know about the others, but it did push the market, and now California is at 25%. They went from 4% to 25%. And this helped, but they have money to do, to actually fund it.
But they also were very public about saying they were eliminating gas vehicles, which was a different incentive that was very public at the same time. So it's hard to say whether they were corresponding influences or whether they were just sort of lucky coincidences.
Yeah, we didn't eliminate gas vehicles, but I get your point. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I see maybe other discussion on those comments, and then Secretary Flora, if you have something specifically respond to that. Or if you're,
Not to that comment, but a comment on number one though still. So did you have a follow-up?
I think we had some follow-ups on that.
Very briefly, and sorry I'm late. I'm Darren Lovas here for Secretary Wiedefeld, and we were stuck in traffic outside. Funny enough. Department of Transportation. And I understand the idea in principle behind this policy, which is to get us well past peak gasoline use by targeting the biggest users. And there are potential equity concerns about providing an incentive to people, consumers who don't need it. And it may make sense to modify this to apply to LMI consumers. We could also reduce the cost. And then the other question that I've heard raised is what happens to the cars that are retired? It'd be good to specify that. Well, yeah. In principle, this makes sense as a policy. It's just that the price tag on it and lack of clarity about the design of it, I think, are a problem.
I think we've got a follow-up, but just a clarifying question. Are you referring to the recommendation as a whole or just the super user bonus?
Oh, super user.
Just the super user bonus. Okay. And then I think we had David Smetic and Director Pinsky and Secretary Flora. Did you have?
Yes, I have a question. Was I first? Sorry.
This was just anything else in response to Ms. Laszlo Mizrahi's comment.
I had a question related to the more detailed report that was developed with the MWG and the Nature Conservancy, the funded energetics that I'm trying to look up now. You mentioned that there were other states that were evaluated and this kind of program was brought up again, but Commissioner, you just mentioned that some folks at ENT also looked into this, and I'm just trying to understand the report that came to the MWG and the information that they highlighted at Secretary McElwain also noted from states that have put these forward and seen benefits versus some of the other research that's been done. Can you explain a little bit more of the process behind the MWG's report, the states they looked at? Just my understanding is that these programs have been pretty successful in helping.
You're talking about all of them or just the super user?
I was thinking about all of them, but I could have misunderstood your comments, Commissioner. So I think that your comments were for the general.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Energetics had looked at all of the states that offer incentives. Their conclusion were that they were very effective at driving up the fee, that adding to the federal incentive added up. They added, and this is all from memory, though, that if you ran out of money very shortly, right, then in fact it could be a disincentive because people then could say, well, I'll wait till next year when they put more money into the basket. But that if you provided the incentives and they were confident enough to cover most of the year, they found them all to be useful. Super user concept, I think were only 2 states from memory that had tried that. But the more general add-on to federal, California was the leader on this, they found to be very effective.
Yep.
I should add on the point, you are right, 80% of charging now goes on at home and most of the rest is at work. So it is a bigger challenge for those who don't have a private garage or a private driveway or a carport or something like that.
Which is one of the reasons we have a recommendation in there about that.
Yes.
Secretary Flora, sorry.
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you all for the work you did. I mean, it sounds like you were as thorough as you could be. And I, really, really appreciate that. As I look at this, I have a couple of different, just maybe additional points of information. One is around scale. Do we have any idea of how this all correlates with impact and how much we're really moving the bar, so to speak? And so, and I think that relates specifically to really almost each of these categories, because my second question then is on who's really benefiting, because I am very concerned about how many people are really buying new cars and how many of those people are in the moderate category. And so are those folks, are there really that many cars being built, new by low to moderate income households? And so when we look proportionally at a pie chart or whatever take of who's buying new cars in your analysis, how much of that is really going to impact or be available to low and moderate income as we look at this sort of at a total scale? And so that's my sort of separate comment / question. You may have analyzed that, so I'll close it either way. And then I think a third area that I'm very concerned about is it's sort of like energy efficiency in buildings, right? I mean, before you start doing add-ons, you need to pull down the amount of energy use in the building first. And so for me, how does this tie to what are we doing to get people to drive less in terms of just incentives to just driving less, because what we're doing is we're sort of accepting the amount of vehicle miles traveled to some degree and saying, well, it's okay if you drive electric. In fact, we should be reducing how many miles traveled, are creating an incentive to driving less. And so those are just concerns / comments. Maybe you all looked at that, but those are the things that are sort of weighing on me as I look at all of this.
I mean, I'll try to summarize, and maybe Kim and Mark might even be able to add in some comments if I've left anything out, but the low to moderate income issue is a serious, difficult one with electronic vehicles. We did include rebates for both, like the federal program, both new vehicles and used vehicles. Currently, there's not many new vehicles on the road, so there are not going to be many used vehicles for a while. But that was in an effort to reach that, as was the second set of incentives, which were to add additional money for low and moderate incomes to try to lower the prices even further. But it is a difficult problem because you not only have fewer electric vehicles being bought by low and moderate income, but their charging options may be fewer because they don't have a garage but at the same time, we've got very, very ambitious climate goals, right? I'm quoted as saying these are the most ambitious in the US, and transportation in these cars are the single biggest source of our inventory entirely. So that's pretty much where we came out on those issues. In terms of the vehicle miles driven, we have separate recommendations. There was separate issues we considered to reduce vehicle miles traveled. I know one of the things, and transportation could answer this better than I do, there's been a great deal of difficulty moving mass transit numbers up post-COVID. And the question I think you have to decide is, does that mean you only do that, or do you do vehicles too? This is where the mitigation work group came in.
At the scale that you're in. Yes.
The numbers, what the consultants told me, so you can believe the consultants or not, were that they thought these numbers made a very big difference in carbon inventory. That rightly or wrongly, how many of us rode buses to this meeting today? Okay, that's something, but I think there's some resistance for dealing with getting people out of cars. It doesn't mean this should only be us and can't look at anything else. But at least the conclusion of the group was that we had to do something with emissions from cars, perhaps in addition to vehicle miles traveled reduction, but at least this was the recommendation of the group.
Thank you.
Okay, and we have a hand up from Delegate Stein.
I think Popinski.
We can't hear you.
You're still muted, Delegate Stein.
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
I'm actually on a bus. I'm on a committee. Sorry if there's some background noise, but I just wanted to voice my support for the EV incentive recommendations for the mitigation working group. I think they make a difference across the board. That's one reason why every year the money that's appropriated by the legislature for incentives goes out fast. And I especially like the idea of the LMI bonus and the way in which it would be publicized, that the state would mail instant rebate coupons to qualified households. I mean, that is, we've done that with respect to letting LMI households know about health insurance, about other state benefits, and I think it's proven to be very effective to have this type of information mailed out to eligible households. And also I do like this user bonus, at least as a part. So anyway, so I would vote for all parts of the EV incentive recommendations. Thank you.
Thanks, Delegate Stein. I think just checking, Director Pinsky, did you have something or did you?
Just point out one thing, Chris. As I read this chart, which you distributed, it has the one for the across the board rebate. If it can't be funded, it does not have the same number next to the low and moderate income. So it says to me that the low and moderate income have priority. That's important to point out. Regardless of the issue of infrastructure in poor communities, I think we know that's an issue. We can hold that for another point, but I think inherent in this is the acknowledgement of the focus on low and moderate income. If there's a shortfall or it doesn't get fully funded from the legislature. So I appreciate that. And two, I think it's important for us to look at.
So I think it's, a vote.
Okay. if you'd like to
I would like to just start by saying, I think in general, I made my comments, but I like this. I mean, regardless, we need to have incentives for people to buy EVs. We do. We have 86,000 we have 6 million or so cars registered that are on the road, and only 86,000 of them are EVs. So that's just 1.3%. So I think it's a good idea if we're trying to get that number up. We're trying to get people into more EVs. So if we have, well, I guess we have to worry about the funding later. That's a different issue, but I do support making sure that we have more incentives for people to drive these cars, buy the cars.
Okay, thanks. So I think the chair has asked that we call the question. Is there a motion to vote on this recommendation as drafted?
So moved.
Okay.
To ask a question before we get to that point. This is Charmaine Brown, Climate Justice Lead.
Okay, we hear you, Charmaine.
I just wanted to ask a really quick question before you take the vote based on what the secretary just said about the 86,000 cars that are registered, because trying to connect the dots in terms of how many buyers are really low to moderate income. Do we have data on the demographic that purchased the 86,000? It's more of a question because I think it would help to understand where we're seeing upticks and what those trends are. So
I don't know about the data and who would have it in this room, but maybe you can speak on that. But I will tell you, I'm happy to see the blue one with the 5,000, because in order to get the number up, irrespective of where it is, even if it's 5% out of that 86,000 that are higher income, we need incentives to get the number up. And this is one way we can do that. Do you have the numbers? Any idea?
Well, I will say that 86,000 is right. And the single largest category of that vehicle is of electric vehicles is in Tesla. So that should tell you quite a bit.
There we are.
Income level.
But that's also market driven. I mean, we're gonna see that changing
Oh,
dramatically.
yes. No, I'm saying that that's a snapshot of the
Yeah,
current
but it-
situation. But you're right, we need to turn over the fleet, which is between 5 and 6
There's-
vehicles. So
Just
it's a
about,
challenge.
well, there's a tension obviously between the source of the carbon right now tends to be the vehicles, and the new vehicles are mostly bought by people of better means. So the tension is how much do you direct to low to moderate income, and how much do you direct to the biggest source of the inventory problem? You can come out different ways on that, but it is hard to, if you designed a program that only helped low to moderate income, then you're not addressing the biggest piece of the inventory. So a decision has to be made to some extent if you start trading off one against the other.
Yeah, I agree with that, although since I have the floor briefly. We want to turn the fleet over. So we really have to keep an eye on how these incentives are implemented. So we don't actually have households buying 2 vehicles when they have 1, buying 3 vehicles when they have 2, right? And increasing the size of the fleet and therefore increasing BMT, to go to Secretary Flores' comment. So that's one of the, whatever we implement, we're going to have to keep an eye on its effects and change it, amend it over time, right? Make sure we're achieving what we want to achieve and not having unintended consequences such as a larger fleet and more BMT.
Yeah, just a general real quickly. We at some point we tried to start figuring out some of the details, and we figured that the design had to be done by the agencies and the General Assembly. And so we tried to make them broad recommendations, but don't read any of these as saying that all of the details are fixed.
Okay, so we had a motion from Director Pinsky to vote on this recommendation as drafted. Is there a second? Second. Okay, so the way we'll handle the voting is all of the members of the commission who are online, we'll ask you to raise your hands when we ask yes, and then no, and then abstain, and then the room will count hands as they come up. So everyone right now is voting on whether to include recommendation number 1 as drafted in the draft report that will be subject to approval next month. All those in favor online, please click the raise hand, and in the room, please physically raise your hands.
You put the hands down.
Okay, yeah, in the room, you guys can lower your hands.
I'm scared. So
I know.
All right, and then, yeah, sorry, this is taking a while. So just as a note to everyone online, we appreciate the participation from many online, but we are only counting votes from members of the commission. So we appreciate the enthusiasm, but if you wouldn't mind not raising your hand if you're not a member of the commission, it may speed the vote counting a bit. Okay, so any opposed, and please all lower your hands because we're about to move to no's. Any opposed, please raise your hand. Okay, we got in the room and then online. Okay, so this recommendation passes, so it will be included in the draft of the report. And then moving on to recommendation number 2. This one was not flagged for discussion yet, I don't believe. Would the MWG co-chairs like to introduce it to the group? Oh, and I'm sorry, thank you for the reminder. Any abstentions on the last vote?
Process of elimination.
Yeah, thank you.
Chris, could you please announce what the total votes are?
So we had 2 no, 1 abstention, and appreciate help from staff counting the number of yeses. I got 12.
Okay.
Mike, do you want?
So recommendation number 2,
Oh, you want it summarized?
lead electrification technical assistance program.
Yeah, I think the example that was talked a lot about in the mitigation working group was where a small plumber who's got 5 trucks or something like that. The assumption was that a large fleet probably doesn't need assistance, but if you got somebody who's got 5 plumbing trucks, trying to provide public outreach to them on electrifying made some sense. It's intended as a pilot program. The recommendation was for $2 million and that it be allocated to among the geographic region of the state with preference to small businesses. And it was the concept of the super user trucks that run a lot of mileage. So if you got a plumbing fleet that's out on the road every day going from house to house, that was the concept. And this was, I think, one of the very few where it was a unanimous recommendation.
Okay, discussion of recommendation number 2. Yes.
Latif Charter and DGS. I would just recommend, I mean, if this is for small fleets and it's going to impact small businesses, not make the application process very onerous. It's going to be a big hurdle for these small businesses to try and do the application. They're not going to want to go through the effort to do it. So if it could be, obviously this is implementation, but more streamlined, just thought into that. I think that would help to implement the program.
And that we acknowledge that the program administrators, as they develop this program, need to consider things. And I think that's a great one to add there.
Yep.
Okay, any commissioners online? Okay, then I suggest we entertain a motion on this one.
I'd like to entertain a motion in support.
Okay, any second? Okay, so moved. So now everyone, we will be voting on recommendation from the mitigation working group number 2, create a fleet electrification technical assistance program. Why don't we do it around the room first? I'll count and let you guys know you're done, and then we'll turn on lights. So all votes in favor. Okay, got you in the room. And now everyone online, raise your hand. You're in favor. Okay, everyone can lower their hands online. Any opposed? Okay, any abstentions? All right then, that one passes unanimously. Moving to recommendation number 3, creating a dealer engagement program. This one was flagged for discussion. Co-chairs, anything to introduce this item?
The history of this were originally there were proposals to have money for training of dealers and an extra incentive for salesmen who sell EVs. We had the Dealers Association in, and they'd indicated they didn't really think it was necessary because they thought that the dealers and the salesmen were all aware of the issue already. Concern was expressed, though, that if you had the used car dealer on the corner, could they afford to put in charging equipment in order to keep the cars on their lot charged? I know from conversations with convenience stores, the Royal Farms and something, that a bank of 4 chargers could cost $500,000 by the time you run wiring and panels and everything else. And so the genesis of it were to try to do something for those used car dealers who would also be selling to low to moderate income. Again, it's sort of a pilot program. It's $1 million for 3 years to provide at least a jump start for those. This one did have some opposition. There were 14 in favor, 3 opposed.
Okay, thanks. Discussion from the commission? Yes.
Yeah, I'd
Sure.
like to start that one. This one, I didn't hear you though. What was your last comment about low to moderate income?
The thought was, and this is not as important, but if we're going to sell electric vehicles to the low to moderate income group, they're the people most likely to buy it from a used car dealer on the corner and not be ones who are buying it from the new Lexus dealer down the hall. So it's not a major issue, but it's a factor.
I'm glad you said that. So for me, I'm really opposed to this one, and I'm going to tell you why. You just made my point, actually. Low to moderate income people usually go to those dealers. It's also not only low to moderate, it's also people with bad credit, right? They can't get a used car from a regular dealer. So they go to those mom and pop independent small ones on the corner, but they charge double for the car. So I have experience knowing about that just from people I know growing up in these low income, even me as a 18-year-old, and my parents, let's say, not coming from money, those were the dealers that the people I saw in those low income communities, we would go there, but they would charge 30% interest on the car. And the car would be, they buy the car for $5,000, they sell the car for $15,000, $20,000. It's not worth anything. So for me, I definitely would not give them money to install EVs because they're already preying on the poor and the moderate income. That's my take on this one.
Yeah, I don't think there was any discussion on that issue in the mitigation working group.
Right. You have to have lived that one. But that's sad to say, a reality. So when I saw this one, I immediately thought about their business model typically for those dealers. So I don't think this would give them an incentive to sell EVs. They're going to sell used cars that come to them from auctions, and they're going to sell them to the low and moderate and poor people. So that's my take on that one.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Just a quick question. Was the community of used car dealers engaged in this process? Because I know a lot of them don't want the public coming to their lots like after hours. If it's open to the public, their parking lots then have to be open 24 hours a day. A lot of them lock their gates at nighttime because they don't want the public coming on the property, park thefts, etc. So how much are these? I don't know if that was taken into account or not.
We had representatives from the Dealers Association, which is not just small independents, right? I mean, they tend to be dominated by the large dealership groups. We did not have any separate groups from small or used car dealers there.
Okay. Any other discussion from commissioners? Any online? Okay, yeah, Secretary Flora.
Just one comment. I think this is not where I would invest money for our infrastructure. So locationally and user. So I have a really hard time with this one just in terms of we need infrastructure. We absolutely need infrastructure. But I'm not sure with the dollars we have, this is where I feel the best location necessarily is. So I just wanted to share that in case the group had any additional commentary to that, but that's troubled by this one.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think there's discussion beyond that on what you've heard here.
No, I will say during our meetings, I was a little surprised at the dealers felt the strongest way to get more EVs on the road was the incentive, not direct payments to them. So
that's true.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, well, I suggest we call the question. Is there a motion to vote on this recommendation? No? I guess we can vote it down or we can just leave it alone. I don't know what protocol. We always vote on all of them.
It's not moved, it's not moved.
If it's not moved, it's not moved.
Yeah.
Okay, we can move along then. This one did not make it in to the draft report. So moving on to number 4, developing electric vehicle and vehicle to grid readiness standards. Mike and Kim, would you like to introduce this one?
This one overlaps a study that MEA is doing. So I don't know if Director Pinsky would rather summarize this, but it's a recommendation on basically building codes for multifamily and commercial buildings have EV-ready standards. And again, as I say, MEA is already doing a study on this, but I guess it recommends that that if that study concludes that it should be one, then we add our recommendation to it. And again, it was a unanimous recommendation.
Okay, yeah, Director Pinsky.
We're not done, but I don't think the affirmation of the Climate Commission will work against anything we do. I do have one question, however, and that is whether we're talking about level 2 or level 3. And I raise that, look, I think we all acknowledge that we have to have an infrastructure where working poor folks can utilize it. And some apartment buildings have some parking, some don't have a lot of parking. Obviously, there are standards for that. You know, I've been thinking more, I happen to have an electric car like a few other people around this table. What role level 3? In other words, when you can go in 20 minutes from 10% to 80%, where if you have a level 2 and you need 8 or 9 hours and you plug it in at night and do it in the morning, and then you have to go to work, it limits the availability. And again, I don't have an answer for this. It's just an issue that I think is coming up more and more in terms of how we gauge need for level 2 and level 3, and what the utilization is going to be, you know, and what that potential market's going to be. And it could be very different, obviously, in a middle class, upper middle class community, or a working poor neighborhood. So it's just a question I have. I don't know if that came up. Again, we support generally going in that direction. We clearly have to have infrastructure in working poor communities. Have the expansion of EV utilization, but I don't know if you took up the issue of level 2.
There was not a specific discussion of level 2 versus level 3. There was a discussion, and the recommendation includes that it be a bi-directional and include a certain gauge of wiring. But I don't think there was a specific discussion of level 2 versus level 3.
Okay, I mean, we can keep it generic. That's fine. I just, it's an issue somewhere down the pike that we're going to up. That's all.
Okay.
So I just want to clarify that if the advantage of leaving it ambiguous is that if I understand correctly, if it's a fast charger, more people can have access to the site. However, when you use a fast charger, your battery degrades much more quickly. And so it disadvantages the individual who's lower income because the life expectancy of the battery is substantially shortened.
Agreed on all counts. It's an issue that is going to have to be addressed.
There's also
battery storage. Look, I don't want to get into the auto industry and battery storage, but these are questions that are going to be coming up more and more.
There are also trade-offs that if you go to the more expensive charging system, do you get pushback on how many you install versus, and you can argue that with a faster system, maybe you need fewer, but more expensive. Speaking not for the group, but personally, I think that's an issue you leave to the MEA and to make a recommendation.
Right.
But that we recommend there be charging equipment, and then the details have to be worked out.
Yeah, if I could, Chris. As Michael said earlier, you said 80% are at home. You know, it's been, we know, among the middle and upper middle class. We know that, just like solar rooftop has been on the middle and upper middle class. It is what it is. You know, we understand the shortcomings. As we build infrastructure other than at homes, in public places, besides workplaces, it's complicated. You know, the police get involved and the car stays too long. I mean, there are a lot of issues that go along with this, which we haven't had to address, which we will have to address, particularly in urban areas, you know, where there may or may not be a lot of parking to even put in the EV chargers. and how long you can stay in that spot, you know, or if the apartment building only has X parking, not Y parking. So it just does raise a lot of questions. I think generic's fine. I'm sure we'll be having this discussion a year from now.
Okay, appears there's no more discussion. Would anyone like to make a motion on this recommendation? No,
Online? Is anyone on?
I'm not seeing any hands online.
Favor.
All right, great. Is there a second? Okay, so now we're all voting on number 4. Around the room in favor, please raise your hands. Okay. And online. Okay, thank you all. And then any opposed? In the room or online? Okay, any abstain? Okay, oh. We have 1 abstention. Okay, so this one passes. I counted 18 yes and 1 abstention. Moving to number 5. Oh, sorry, yes, Secretary Moore.
Comment on this one. It's referring to the development of new housing, basically, but I think it should be, I'm not recommending it's too late, but as this goes further, it should relate also to people parking. That's developed, because any new parking garages or any types of infrastructure of that source, part of the development project, it could make.
Very good point.
Also be included, as part of the.
Yeah.
Do we want to go back and revote? Would that-
That's a good
Well, I'm
point.
trying to figure out where you all want friendly amendments, but that was this one. So I think it needs to include.
That's a good one.
Well, what I'm hearing is the working group is creating this, and probably a lot of massaging as it moves forward, but I would like to get on record that addition to some of them.
We could either see it as a friendly amendment or doing it when we deal with the whole package in the next meeting or meeting after, either way.
Why don't we just do that?
Okay. So we'll add that as a flag when we come back around. Okay, so recommendation number 5 from the mitigation working group to implement the advanced clean trucks rule. Mike or Kim?
You want to do this one, Kim? I'm doing all of them.
Well, the 5 and 6 are coupled. It
Yeah.
basically is to endorse what MDE is doing. So if it's
Yeah,
helpful to say that the commission's behind it, then we wanted to put that forward.
thank you. And this is an easy one. We're doing it. We've already done number 6 already. And number 5, we're just about ready to finish number 5. But thank you for putting this in, and I think it would be good just to have your endorsement. So this is an easy one, I think. So. why don't
Okay, yeah. Any other discussion?
Can we batch the 2 of them?
If there's no objection, we could batch. If that's the motion to vote on both 5 and 6 at the same time, we can certainly do that.
Yes.
So I think we'll count that as a motion. Is there a second? Second. Okay, so we're voting on both items 5 and 6. All in favor please raise your hand. Okay, everyone in the room can lower them. Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, that one passes unanimously with 19 votes in favor for both of those recommendations, 5 and 6. Moving to number 7, transitioning locally operated transit systems to zero emissions buses.
Go ahead, Mike.
It's pretty self-explanatory. It was proposing it in 2025. The state would require the procurement, so it's not necessarily replacement, but procurement of zero-emission vehicles, buses, by locally operated transit systems, but to couple it with some sort of direct grants or support, and then have training and worker protections contained in the state legislation covering the zero-emission bus transition. So it's really addressing busing, local bus transition.
And we did believe with the federal money there that emphasizing this at this time was important.
Yeah, I think from memory, I think there was some opposition from local government, but that was the two opposition, I think, if I'm remembering it right.
So, great. And so we did, this was flagged for discussion by Administrator Belton, our MACO representative, who I know had to leave early. Administrator Belton, do we still have you? So he asked me to sort of read his comment if he had to leave before this came up. So the technology is not yet at a point where we can fully operate local transit systems with EVs. Those jurisdictions that are trying to are reporting issues. I'd like to push for a delay in implementation to allow the technology to catch up, maybe 2035. Local governments are not against EV implementation, but want to make sure it works first. So that's from Administrator Belton, our MACO rep.
So he's suggesting a 10-year delay?
Yes, he suggested maybe 2035.
I think that's a very long time. If I may make a comment out of turn.
Yep. Any other reactions or discussion? I think Secretary Flora and then David Smenik.
Once again, it's a scale question. I mean, this is sort of vague in terms of like the number of these types of vehicles, where they're at, who operates them, at least the micro, sort of that last mile, micro transit things. I mean, who's impacted is the question again that I'm sort of trying to figure out. I mean, I agree we need to do this. It's a question of how it gets phased in, who's impacted. And then in this one, we don't specify what the grants or the type of support is. It's left open-ended. So I'm worried in doing that. It's not going to be specific to where it would to go. So I'm in concept, I agree with what this one's about, but I feel like there's a lot here that's not clear. It's a little too open-ended for me. So I don't know, maybe the working group has more to offer there.
If there's no reaction to that, then we can move to David.
I agree 100% with that, because is it just the buses, or is it also the infrastructure for the charging associated with that the grants would cover? And is it all buses, or is it for transit systems, or is it just some? It's very vague.
This one's particularly vague.
Yeah, it's very vague.
It has a good intent that needs to be zeroed in on where the need and potential is.
The discussion was just about procurement of the buses. I don't remember a discussion about charging infrastructure, though you got to assume they go hand in glove in some sense. But the discussion was about the zero emission buses. I don't think any discussion beyond that.
And one point of procedure here that you guys can amend this, right? So if you have a way of tightening it up, or if there's some preferential language, the commission is definitely open and able to do that.
Yeah, I would add that you see only some of the recommendations we spent time on. There were a lot of time spent on a lot of issues. And I think our assumption had been that we couldn't do the details on a lot of these. Doesn't mean that you can't. But there was an assumption that we would have the agencies and the departments that in the General Assembly would put a lot of detail on it, and we would make recommendations. That doesn't mean you can't, but that's why you may see some ambiguity of vagueness in issues because we were looking at a lot of big picture items.
Okay, so we have several hands up, David Smetic, Beth Harbor, Darren Lovis, and Linsky. David.
Yeah, I think I like this recommendation. I do agree there's some vagueness around it. I think that we could get through some amendments a little bit more specific on things. Particularly, I'd be interested in language around the infrastructure support, extending some of maybe the grants or the references to that, and supporting the local transit systems with infrastructure. I think I'm also looking at this through the lens that we, as this commission was asked to a couple months ago, of how are we funding things, how are we spending our money, and making sure that we're spending money on new procurement for products and large or small that are helping us achieve our climate target. I think is one of the things that attracts that I find attractive in this one. It's saying that new purchases need to be focused and aligned with our climate targets. And so I think as this commission, we can be pretty comfortable and confident recommending those kinds of things. That's forward looking. So that's why I'm a little bit comfortable with some of the vagueness in it. I would be open to having some additional language in there related to the infrastructure. But I think that as the Climate Commission providing this kind of direction and recommendation to, which is general in the state, whether it's the agencies, the General Assembly, to dive into these implementation details. That's why at least right now, I'm comfortable with it as is, but I would be open if enough commissioners are interested in infrastructure language within there. I kind of love that we are diving into implementation details in this commission. That's cool. But I also think that we need to leave a little bit of breathing room for the General Assembly and you all as that to administer many of our agencies get to dive into it very deeply.
Okay, and Beth?
Oh, thanks. So I don't know if this precludes the state from being a locally operated transit system, because we have a statewide transit MTA that offers, bus service in the Baltimore area. So I just wonder if the intent was, all buses, or it was just the locally operated, which would not necessarily, in my view, consider the state's transit operation. And I just wonder, did you have anyone weigh in from MDOT or MTA, or would somebody be available to weigh in now? Is this something that they're on board with? They certainly want to move toward this.
Yeah, we have MDOT. I'll note that the state buses are already subject to electrification requirements under state law. Darren, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, that's right. So on this one, we actually voted in favor of moving this out of the mitigation working group. We've checked in with the lots coordinator and it makes sense. Having said that, I'll say two things. One, I agree that 10 years is too long of a delay, but we definitely want to make sure that services don't get cut, right, in order to buy better buses, right? So we want to make sure that that trade-off is not made by these agencies. And then the second thing I'd say that'll help to make that less likely is the bipartisan infrastructure law does have funding, including from the carbon reduction program, that can be used for this purpose, which is part of the reason we voted in favor of it and support it now.
Okay. Thank you. And Director Pinsk, nothing? Okay. Any other?
Yeah, a small one. I was trying to look back at the 2022 or 2021 annual reports from the commission as well. And last year we did have a recommendation that this, it was even vaguer, to be honest, that the state should enact policies to move locally operated transit systems toward zero emission buses and vehicles. So it is something the commission has weighed in on. I think this is even a little bit more specific because it has references to IIJA incentives, but for what it's worth, this has been an area that the commission has encouraged the state to move to in the past for those locally operated transit systems. Anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I guess with the work groups, was the intent here to require all buses to be zero emission? Because if I'm sure local or entities, they've got some buses that are at or beyond their useful life, they need them urgently. They don't have the infrastructure to support them. They'll be required to buy zero emission and not be able to actually operate them.
The phrasing was that they required that the procurement of buses be zero emission vehicles. we didn't say all vehicles, but clearly I think the assumption would be to the extent money was available, they had to procure zero emission vehicles. But I don't, but there was no, it's not, you may not operate a vehicle unless it's zero emission. It was a procurement mandate. Got that right?
Yes.
But I think correct me if I'm wrong, but if we say you must, be requiring, you have to buy a zero emission bus, and they buy it and learn that we don't have the infrastructure to support the buses, and then we have other problems. I think that's what he's saying.
Yeah, that's fine.
Since we don't totally have all the infrastructure available, is what I'm hearing for buses. I think that was the issue. Are we certain if we say you must buy zero emission vehicles, buses, and then they can't charge it?
I don't think there was any discussion to that level of detail. It was just that they must procure zero emission vehicles. No discussion of exceptions or.
Yeah, and I'll note that this recommendation is beginning in 2025, so it wouldn't be effective immediately. I think perhaps
that's true.
Vision there would be
Right.
time there for infrastructure planning.
It's just the way it's worded. It should require, if it does mean requiring that can be a tough pill to swallow for these local jurisdictions.
Yeah.
And so we have Secretary Flora, and I heard a hand from Ann Lindner. So Secretary Flora and then Ann Lindner.
So I'm going to put my amendment forth before it. Which would be that that in addition to the procurement of zero emission buses, that there be words infrastructure. I think there could be, I'm not going to wordsmith it right now, but I think there could be something that speaks to the notion that that the should require, the procurement in alignment or in conjunction with infrastructure availability or provisions also. And then particularly as it relates to the grants, I would really like to put in there that preference should be given as it relates to grants and support to buses serving low to moderate populations, so that we are not undermining other goals by making it even more difficult to provide those types of services. So
Can I
Chris-
second that?
And Chris will figure out the wordsmith. The second part was that there be preference be given to any direct grants and support for these types of buses serving low to moderate income populations.
And so I'm editing on the screen here. We can perhaps clean it up later, but I've suggested getting a long sentence, but we add preference for vehicles serving low to moderate income communities after the direct grants or support for local systems. And then note that at the end somewhere that this is for both vehicles and charging infrastructure.
Yeah, I think I Mako's point. These things have to go in alignment, so we have to be able to support buses and the infrastructure to go with it. So, Chris, I'll look at that, but that's the intent I'm trying to have.
Also, you said this is the years, as it says here, 2025. Remember, that's almost here.
Yeah.
24 is in January. I think as a commission, we need to make sure that we're comfortable. That's all. That if we say you must buy, we don't want to put the local jurisdictions, these local areas in any bind. So if we're confident and we know that we're not setting you up for failure, you can do this. You have plenty of charging infrastructure, then I agree with it. But I'm just putting that out there to just make sure. I think we have a responsibility to make sure we think we can get there by 2025, the infrastructure that is to support it.
Yeah, so that was my question, which is, and maybe you guys said this and I missed it, but what is the rationale for the 2025 year?
My best memory were that the original proposal were to start it immediately and had the same conversation here that's not infrastructure yet. And therefore, 2025 was I can't remember who advanced the 2025, but, I think that's what happened.
Right, and once again, it was also to take advantage of the federal funds that are available for this.
That's true too. Yeah.
You know, that's where 10 years down the road.
Oh, I see.
So we have an amendment on the table that I've phrased like this, in case it's tough to read. The existing recommendation through coupling this requirement with assistance to local systems through direct grants or support for local systems, and then adding for both vehicles and charging infrastructure with preference for vehicles serving low to moderate income communities. And then separating the rest into a standalone sentence.
I have another question.
Yes.
Just want to make sure I understand. So we're just requiring local operated transit systems. So not all of one particular.
That's right. The state operated transit systems are already subject to requirements like this in state law. This would be
Zero?
For the local.
Okay, are they subject to zero? They have to buy? Oh,
I think by the same year. I think that's where 2020,
oh,
Maybe that's, yeah.
okay.
this just brings them up with.
This does omit the private operators, like your private charter services. I think you're saying.
There,
Local operators tend to include both publicly owned or authority and private operators.
I will have to get back to you on that. Just like you had earlier, you had a good question about the fleet makeup of the lots, systems, and I do not know the answer readily for that either. So good questions.
I remember a discussion about school buses and fleet ownership. I don't remember any discussion about ownership of the local transit buses. I think we assumed they were owned by the local agency.
Because there's so many privately owned and then contracted with. I just want to make sure it's captured in.
I don't
But yeah.
believe there was a discussion of that.
Did that answer your question?
I think so. Yes. Yes.
Well, I guess process wise, so we have an amendment proposed by Secretary Flores. So I suggest we vote on that amendment and then the recommendation as amended, should that amendment pass.
One more amendment. Is it possible that we could, and please be honest with me if this is not appropriate, but I'm still thinking of putting people out of business. Are we really going to be ready? Like we did with BEPS, can we have some kind of waiver where if they've applied for money and didn't get it, I mean, they find themselves, oh my God, I have to buy this zero emissions bus and we don't have the infrastructure. Now we're in a pickle. Does that matter? Do you think we should add something to say, I don't know, some kind of waiver there? Or should we just go for it and just let it happen? Let them figure it out.
I suppose this would be a legislative action. And so the General Assembly placed a similar requirement for school buses, they did include a exemption process. So I would suggest maybe selfishly, because it's 2:30, we leave that as an implementation detail out of the recommendation. Well,
Okay.
Noting that it is an important topic.
Yeah. Okay, it's fine with me.
Okay, so then we had a motion for an amendment. Is there a second? So we can vote on the amendment? Great. And so I'll read the amendment and then we'll vote on it. So inserting here in green, after support for local systems for both vehicles and charging infrastructure with preference for vehicles serving low to moderate income communities. So all those in favor of this amendment, please raise your hands. In the room, you can lower them, and online, please keep them up. Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so the amendment passed, and now I suggest we vote on the recommendation as amended. We'll need a motion.
Motion in favor?
Okay, second. Okay, so now we're voting on the recommendation as amended for inclusion in the draft report. All in favor?
You're on number 7, right? You just lost me there.
Number 7 as amended up on the screen.
Okay,
Yes.
as amended
by you.
As amended. I thought we were doing this. Okay, okay.
Yeah, okay. We can shorten it for future amendments if that's desirable. And then I got you all in the room and then online. Thank you. Any opposed? And any abstentions? Okay. All right, thank you. So this one passes as amended, 12 in favor, 17 in favor, 1 abstention. So moving to number 8.
Yeah, this is a recommendation basically to provide support and funding for a provision that's already in the Climate Solutions Now Act, which is to support a 2025 electric school bus mandate. That's a requirement in the act. It's a recommendation here that the funding be allocated for it and that there be a multi-agency and stakeholder working group, including utilities, PSC, parent, teacher, student organizations, working organizations and school districts to support and accelerate the transition. We're 18 in favor, 1 opposed in the working group.
Thank you, Mike. Discussion from commissioners? Yes, Secretary Flora.
It's my understanding a lot of schools contract their bus services. And so how would they be? Is it buses owned by the schools or any buses?
It's both.
Contracted.
It's
Okay,
both.
that's what I want to make sure we're covering. Okay.
Both buses are contract and owned.
Okay.
Then Delegate Stein.
Thank you. Just wanted to mention that also as part of Climate Solutions Now, we did require a pilot program for that would provide funding. I believe it's through the PSC in partnership with utilities for it's a limited number of electric school buses, but there is something already in place that will provide funding again on a limited basis. So in general, I support number 8, just with the understanding that there is already a pilot program underway.
Just to clarify that, Delegate Stein's correct. There is a pilot program. It's actually in front of the PSC right now. And the pilot program is a combination with the utilities and the school districts in which the electric school bus functions as an electric school bus in the day, and at night and on the weekends and in the summer, it functions as a battery. And so it's a very cool pilot program that hopefully will yield a lot of benefit to not only health, environment, but also to the bottom line for the private sector.
Thank you. And David Lapp.
Thank you. I'd like to just suggest a friendly amendment. As Kim just noted, this is before the PSC. We are one of the parties to that case, which is involving extensive time and expert testimony and all. And I would just suggest that our office, OPC, which is the advocate for state residential utility customers, be included in the state stakeholder working group.
Go to the co-chairs. Would you consider that a friendly amendment?
I think I'd consider it friendly. There was no discussion, no intent to exclude them.
I have a question.
Okay, so I've added them to the parenthetical, and Secretary McElwain, and then
I'm assuming that list in parentheses was not meant to be all inclusive, so we might want to just sort of say included but not limited to versus starting to name
Such as?
everyone.
Yeah, I don't think it was meant to be exclusive, so I think you're right.
Those are types. Not specific.
okay, and then Secretary McElwain.
Okay. So I absolutely love this one, by the way. The only thing I have a question on is my pace with creating new working groups is, my goodness. I mean, We have so many. Sometimes we gotta staff them, get them up, and then you got arguments. And I think if we could keep it in here. I'm just saying, do we need another working group? Would this help or hinder making movement on this one? Just wanted to throw it out there. I'm for whatever, because I do like this one, so I'm willing, I'll vote on it anyway, but another working group.
So we're going to see a later proposal for climate plans for schools that does talk about working groups. So maybe this could be skipped for a working group, as there will be in a later proposal an opportunity. But by this county level, not by.
Thank you. I love that. Yes.
Sorry, I can't resist making it. We need a working group to study the effect.
So from the chairs of this working group, how do you feel about that? Is that going to give you heartache, or you want to keep it in?
I don't have any, I'm not wedded to a working group. However, if I could give a friendly amendment to the amendment.
Yes.
And that is to actually, the state should, and then delete everything between also and to. So it would read, the state should support and accelerate the deployment, because the intention there is that this program needs some attention. So
I see.
we don't have to say how that gets done, but it will get done.
Like that.
Yeah, I don't think there was any discussion about the work group other than the request that if you had one, add work organizations, but other than that. So I think if you left it out, it wouldn't be an issue.
Oh, good.
Second.
Okay, so, all right. So we have an amendment to remove the working group. So the second sentence would read, the state should also support and accelerate the deployment of electric school buses, providing technical assistance and securing federal funds and other funds. So we have that amendment. Do we have a? Yep. Okay, great. So let's vote on that amendment. All in favor? Okay, got you in the room. Got you online. Everyone can lower their hands. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so this is now amended. I guess I defer to the co-chairs. Do you want to keep on voting on recommendations that have been amended with unanimous consent, or?
If it's unanimous, I don't think you need a separate vote. We can speed it up.
No? Okay, so without objection, we'll consider recommendation number 8 approved.
Right.
Thank you all. And then a quick time check. I believe we will make it through famous last words, the mitigation working recommendation. Before we run out of time.
We can do this.
And then the ARWG ones will be considered in batch 2 when we meet in a couple of weeks.
9 and 10 arise out of the Climate Solutions Now Act included a provision for a task group to study incentives for retrofitting buildings. And 9 and 10 in particular, I'll come to 11 separately, were proposals from building organizations about how they think that funding should be done. We are talking about not millions, but billions of dollars in potential retrofit costs. So number 9 was a proposal for a real property tax deduction or credit for decarbonization expenses or exemptions from recordation and personal property taxes for decarbonization. The concept is, as I recall it, that if a building has to retrofit and is going to, what could be for some buildings a lot of money, they should at least get some sort of deduction or credit against taxes for the cost involved. It doesn't define how much of a deduction or credit, but it calls for a deduction or credit of that type.
Okay, so I'll open for discussion. Understand that we do have one from Administrator Belton.
I just need to understand, is this decarbonization expenses, is this for EV plugins?
No, this is for building.
Heating and cooling.
building energy performance standards, it's the retrofitting of buildings. Think you've got a gas furnace in a 10-story building and you're going to replace them with heat pump.
That's right.
And in some cases, you may be replacing it well before the life of the furnace is gone, right? And so the cost of retrofitting existing buildings, the proposal is that there be a real property deduction or tax credit or some tax benefit to offset some of those retrofitting costs.
Thank you.
Okay, and I'll read a comment from Administrator Belton, who offered this, but again, had to leave early. Our MACO rep, number 9 will have a significant impact on local revenues and be viewed as an unfunded mandate. Proposed tax deductions should be from the state only. Local governments need to fund the education blueprint, which is a heavy lift by itself, and are also trying to figure out how to fund local climate resilience initiatives on their own. I may need to vote against this one if it includes tax deductions that impact local government revenue. And so I saw hands from Secretary Flora and Director Pinsky.
Ditto to that comment, because that's kind of what my question was, is what that impact would be. It is 9 intended to be commercial and residential and all of the above? Because 10 only refers to commercial.
I think it was intended to be commercial and multifamily, which is what the building energy performance standards apply to.
Only apply to that, because 9 doesn't really reference.
Yeah, I do think,
Right, so
given who offered it, I believe it was meant to be commercial and multifamily.
then we need to make that, we would need to make that amendment.
Right.
We go forward with this. But I the real property tax deduction and the personal property taxes, we don't know enough about what that financial model would like. Were you able to get into that?
Well, we didn't
Consultant?
set the number, right? So how much the impact would be what number you pick. I mean, the problem is this is enormously expensive for somebody. And so I think the question is, do you put it all on the building owner, or do you have real property taxes take some part of the hit? It doesn't define how much the hit would be, but it does call for some of the hit to be in the real property.
Yeah, I'm fully in favor of retrofit. I'm just not, can't quite learn enough from this to know that's the best solution. I really favor retrofit, so I'll let the others ask.
Okay, and so Director Pinsky and then Jennifer, unless Kim, did you have something specific to that?
Just to
Question.
point out, the state should consider and the state should study.
Yeah.
Okay, so the recommendation is not put in place. So that's it.
Yeah, thanks, Director Pinsky.
Yeah, about 30 or 40 minutes ago, Secretary of the Environment talked about lots of task force and work groups. Well, there's one that's currently in place that she and I co-chair on incentives for buildings. And we're looking at this very issue. At what point do you need incentives or support or rebates? In other words, is there an initial cost that if it's a reasonable return on investment, you don't need additional supports, right? I mean, the state is not a blank check, where anybody can get in line and ask for money. A lot of people have to update their buildings anyway. And if someone makes an investment, which is going to help reduce greenhouse gases, and they have an upfront investment that they have a return on that investment in X years, and after that, they're going to make money, the state shouldn't be writing checks helter-skelter here. So, I mean, that task force or work group is looking at this issue. I mean, as the co-chair said, it makes it a little more palatable where it says should consider, and I don't want to say we're replicating other efforts, but there are things happening in the state. There's already a task force in place to look at much of this. So I'm not sure if I'm going to abstain or to vote against it. Hopefully we will have a report in the next 6 or 7 weeks with some recommendations, and it includes many affected stakeholders.
And just for clarification, so the group that you convened is addressing number 9 and 10.
Mark? Is it 9 and 10?
Being considered by the work group.
You considered 9, I know 9, but
I think it's safe to say those fall within the work group's purview.
Okay.
I don't know. Working group.
And additionally, there's a second work group on solar deployment.
I know, yeah.
yeah.
Which is that, in fact, looking at number 9. I mean, Senator Elfers has already brought that up. So anyway,
You feel like this,
some of these in different ways, shapes and forms are being addressed. Maybe not conclusively, but they are being addressed.
So in fairness, there are other things that we're recommending, including things the Department of the Environment is doing that we're recommending be done, like Clean Cars 1 and Clean Cars 2. So I completely agree they're being considered, but I don't think it means the group couldn't recommend it to be considered. Then you can decide whether that's what you want to recommend being considered or not.
Okay. And we also had a hand from Jennifer.
I was actually pretty much going to say what Michael just said, which is that I think that it underlines the importance of the work that Secretary Pinsky is already doing. And it says that people should take into account the work that Secretary Pinsky is already doing when they make their.
So amendment, maybe, because I think we all, maybe the amendment is something like the state should consider in conjunction with or in alignment with whatever the name of your working group is, so that we sort of say, we care about this issue, but it should be done in alignment with the existing working group. Is there a way to do that? So we don't just leave it off the table entirely?
That makes some sense, because I think the mitigation work group was certainly aware of the task force there.
Seems like mentioning it would really help make sure we don't end up with yet another. Because I am concerned about anything that would put the taxes in there, if there's already a group studying on those types of revenues.
I would definitely would not want them to create yet another work group. And we're already doing it. That might be the solution. They're like, no, wait, we have, so maybe we could add, support that, task force, the building that
I think that would be a friendly amendment.
Building Energy Transition Task Force.
Whatever, yeah.
It's medic.
On that, I was going to suggest, I think we had language in one of the earlier recommendations that was related to an MEA study, the readiness standard. I don't know if that language is on that or to represent the building, whatever the name of the building task force is. I agree. I think these are cool policy ideas. They could drive good retrofit opportunities if they're structured right. If they are already being addressed by the Building Energy Task Force, it doesn't hurt for us to say, yes, we're happy that those are in there like we did earlier. But I think that this was my general comment for these, was that we're saying the state should consider, the state should study. I think that task force is doing that. Hopefully they're on the table. I don't think it hurts us to have it in there, but
okay,
we want the right language.
So we had a suggestion here. We add in conjunction. If the chair and the MWG co-chairs would consider that a friendly amendment, perhaps we can skip voting on that and then vote on the amendment, vote on the recommendation as amended.
Okay.
Perhaps.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a motion to call a question on this one? Okay. And a second. Okay. All right. So we are now voting on recommendation number 9 as amended, where it now says the state should consider in conjunction with the Building Energy Transition Implementation Task Force a real property tax deduction or credit, et cetera, et cetera.
Are we not doing 9 and 10?
Yeah, it would, 9 and 10 you can vote on as a batch. I think I described both.
Okay, we'll batch it with consistent language for both 9 and 10. And we'll fix some verb tense issues later. So all in favor of both 9 and 10 as amended? Okay, I got everyone in the room and those online. One more moment. Okay, thank you. I got all your votes. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so 9 and 10 are both advanced unanimously.
Okay.
5 minutes for the last one.
Suggest we
Number 11, and I should point out that this is the only one which had 21 votes in favor and none opposed. It was absolutely unanimous. The issue that was identified, this is about electric vehicle infrastructure for retrofitting of multi-dwelling units. And the problem that was identified is some buildings are owned by a single owner, some have condo associations, and the condo associations each own a particular parking spot. Some of them have HOAs where the whole garage or parking lot is owned by an HOA. The recommendation was that the EVA infrastructure incentives, whatever they are, should be aligned to that recognition of that division between building owners, condo association, and homeowners association, and commercial tenants, where a commercial tenant has responsibility for the parking, so that whoever has to install the charging equipment is the person who gets the incentives. You don't give the incentives to this group and put the obligation to put in charges on that group.
I could not agree more. That is so important because we're trying to move toward EVs and we want to make sure we're not leaving those folks behind as well. So me personally, totally agree with this one. I think it's great.
Okay, discussion, number 11.
I'll just add one more thing. First of all, there's a new National Academies report pre-publication. I just downloaded on Friday. Was released last week. 643 pages. So I'm not quite up on it. I had a field trip this weekend, but I've been trying to track along. And the recommendations of the National Academy at the federal level are very consistent with everything we've been talking about today in terms of incentivizing EVs and the home thing. One of the things that came up out of there is that nationally, a third of renters don't have access to EV, to their own parking spot. And if you include renters, 44% do not. So something like this, incentivizing as a group, it makes a lot of sense because you're getting to that 44% that don't have their own garage to plug into individually. I just think that's great that we're using, based on this, the science recommendations are being followed, and I think that's important to always track.
Yeah.
Any other discussion on this? Okay, then I suggest we entertain a motion to vote.
So moved.
Okay, and seconded. Okay, so all in favor of number 11? Okay, got you in the room. Everyone online, please keep them up. Okay, thank you. Any opposed? And abstentions? Okay, so number 11 approved unanimously, 18 votes. Okay, so we have 4 recommendations from ARWG in batch 1. I suggest we take those up when we meet again. November 9th. We are also reserving time the following week if we need it. This pace might not need it, which is great. Unless the chair would like to bring up any of the ARWG ones to close. Okay.
No, thank you.
So we'll send around a revised list of all the recommendations, outcome, and then we'll pick this up on November 9th, Thursday, November 9th, here from 1 to 3. Okay. Pretty much everybody.
Thank you.
You know that Reynolds packs that we're using for the trust for nitrogen and phosphorus production generally.
I didn't know that.
Yes,